Have you ever wondered what wild and bizarre stories never made it into the Bible? From scandalous forbidden texts like the Questions of Mary, where things take a disturbingly weird turn with Jesus, to the Gospel of Bartholomew, which reveals shocking answers to questions about humanity's past. Some were deemed heretical, others just too outrageous to fit the holy narrative, but they give us a glimpse into the early church's strangest secrets. So what do these lost tales reveal, and why were they erased from history? Let's get into it. The Gospel of Barnabas hoax. A leather-bound book written in gold letters on ancient-looking pages claims to be 1,500 years old and challenges some of Christianity's most fundamental beliefs. It's known as the Gospel of Barnabas, and it's stirring up quite a storm among religious circles. But what's the story here? Is it real or just another hoax? Listen to this and let me know what you think in the comments down below. So what exactly makes this gospel so controversial? Well, the text, which was reportedly found in Turkey during an anti-smuggling operation, suggests that Jesus was never crucified. Instead, it claims that Judas Iscariot, the infamous traitor from the Bible, was made to look like Jesus and was crucified in his place. Meanwhile, Jesus is said to have ascended to heaven before the Romans could capture him. And if that wasn't shocking enough, the gospel allegedly has Jesus predicting the coming of Muhammad. This aligns with Islamic beliefs that Jesus was a prophet, but he wasn't exactly divine. According to the Turkish government and Islamic media, this ancient manuscript could revolutionize religious thought. Some claim that it undermines Christianity entirely, proving that Islam had it right all along. Iran's Basij press even declared that this discovery could unbalance the powers of the world. But is there any truth to these dramatic assertions? Well, the Gospel of Barnabas raises several red flags. Linguistic experts point out that the Aramaic inscription on the cover, which is supposedly ancient, is actually riddled with modern Assyrian grammatical errors. Even the term used to describe the text as a book is inaccurate for its time. What's more is that some of the claims in the Gospel clash with Islamic teachings, like its mention of 9 heavens instead of the 7 described in the Quran. The text also doesn't hold up historically. For instance, it describes 3 armies in ancient Palestine, each with 200,000 soldiers. However, the entire population of Palestine 2,000 years ago likely didn't exceed that number. And what's even more suspicious is its use of pounds as a unit of weight, which only came into use during the Ottoman Empire. So someone has some explaining to do. Most experts believe that the Gospel is a forgery, likely created in the Middle Ages by someone familiar with both Islamic and Christian texts. Some, however, suggest it was written by a European Jewish scholar who combined elements from the Quran and the Gospels to serve an unknown agenda. Despite these issues, though, the story has captured widespread attention, with many in Islamic media treating it as fact. But what do you believe? Is the Gospel of Barnabas a groundbreaking discovery, or is it more likely nothing but a cleverly crafted hoax? Its historical and linguistic inconsistencies are hard to ignore, but the tale it tells really makes you wonder if there could be any truth to it. The Acts of Paul and Thecla. What if I told you that the Bible once had a secret forbidden chapter about a woman who defied societal expectations, performed miracles, and lived a life of adventure? Let me introduce you to the Acts of Paul and Thecla, an ancient story that feels like it could be the plot of an action-adventure movie mixed with deep spiritual themes. It centers on Thecla, a young woman from Iconium who hears Paul preaching about Christianity, specifically about chastity and celibacy, and as a result, her life takes a dramatic turn. Things get intense right away after Thecla decides to embrace Paul's teachings. This decision leads her to be condemned to death by burning at the stake. But in true cinematic fashion, a miraculous rainstorm saves her. The flames are extinguished and she escapes. She finds Paul and then follows him to Antioch. You'd think things might calm down from there, but nope. In Antioch, Thecla is assaulted by a nobleman. She manages to defend herself, but somehow this gets her arrested again. This time she's sentenced to face wild animals in an arena. Now, this scene is one of the most dramatic and bizarre parts of her story, full of danger, divine intervention, and symbolic moments. It's a life or death situation, but Thecla is no ordinary woman. When she's forced to face these animals as punishment, a crowd gathers to witness her demise. She's thrown into the arena nearly naked and completely vulnerable. But instead of being mauled to death, something extraordinary happens. A lioness approaches her. Rather than attacking, the lioness becomes her protector, standing guard and fending off other animals in the arena. And you'll never believe what happens next. In the midst of this chaos, Thecla sees a pool of water filled with seals. Now, these aren't the cute clapping seals you might picture. They're described as deadly man-eating creatures. Shocking everyone, Thecla decides to jump headfirst into the pool. Why? She declares that she's baptizing herself in the name of God. In Christianity, baptism represents purification and a public declaration of faith. However, it's typically performed by someone else. Thecla takes matters into her own hands here, quite literally throwing herself into danger to prove her devotion. The story then takes another incredible turn. As Thecla immerses herself in the water, divine fire descends from above. The heavenly flames don't harm Thecla though. Instead, they kill the seals in the pool. The crowd is stunned. I mean, wouldn't you be? And Thecla emerges unscathed. The spectacle doesn't end there. When another attempt is made to kill her, this time by tying her to wild bulls, Thecla is saved again by divine fire. At this point, the people watching are so awestruck that they abandon any further attempts to harm her. Instead, they begin to see her as someone chosen by God. Took them long enough. Thecla eventually becomes a wandering preacher, dressing as a man for safety and converting people to Christianity. When she finally reunites with Paul, he recognizes her as a teacher and sends her out to continue spreading the faith. She then spends the rest of her life as a hermit, performing miracles, praying and teaching others. Even at the end of her story, when someone tries to assault her, the cave she lives in literally closes around her to protect her. Clearly, God sees her as someone worthy of saving. So why isn't this story in the Bible? The Acts of Paul and Thecla is considered apocryphal, meaning it wasn't accepted as part of the official Christian scriptures. This is because, for one, it promotes ideas that don't align with biblical teachings, like self-baptism and extreme views on celibacy. It even portrays Paul encouraging these ideas, which contradicts his actual writings in the Bible. Plus, the story's over-the-top miracles and heavy focus on chastity reflect Gnostic beliefs, an ancient view that saw the physical body as evil. But still, the story was wildly popular in its time, especially among groups that valued celibacy and women's leadership roles in religion. In fact, Thecla's tale became so legendary that she was later venerated as a saint, even though there's no historical evidence that she actually existed. The real story of resurrection. If the Bible included a story about a lion getting baptized or a massive talking cross that responded to a voice from heaven, would you still take it seriously? Believe it or not, these aren't just wild ideas. They're actual stories from ancient texts like the Gospel of Peter and the Acts of Paul. These writings were once read by early Christians, but they didn't make the final cut into the New Testament. Why were these bizarre tales rejected? The answer takes us back to the 2nd century. Back then, pastors like Serapion and elders like Tertullian wrestled with strange manuscripts, questionable authorship, and the need to separate fact from fiction. In 199 AD, Serapion took charge of the leading church in Antioch, Syria. Among his responsibilities was overseeing smaller congregations in nearby villages, including one in Rhosis. Shortly after assuming his role, Serapion heard troubling rumors that the Rhosis church was divided over a text called the Gospel of Peter. He wanted to keep the peace, so he visited the congregation. He initially approved of the text being read because he believed it might contain eyewitness accounts from Simon Peter himself. However, Serapion later acquired a copy of the Gospel of Peter and read it for the first time. While much of the text aligned with familiar stories about Jesus, certain parts raised red flags. The text hinted at docetism, a belief that Jesus only seemed human rather than truly being so, a notion that hadn't existed during Peter's lifetime. The oddest part of all, the story of Jesus' resurrection. In this version of the tale, the risen Jesus is described as a towering figure, something like a giant with a massive cross following him around like a dog follows its master. What's even stranger is that the cross talks. Realizing this text couldn't have been written by Peter, Serapion then quickly reversed his earlier approval and wrote to the Rhosis church to warn them. So why exactly did Serapion reject the Gospel of Peter? For early Christians like him, authenticity was everything. They prioritized texts that were linked to first-hand witnesses of Jesus, such as the letters of Paul or the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Gospel of Peter, with its questionable origins and contradictions, simply didn't meet those standards. I mean, come on, a talking cross. How could anyone take that seriously? Modern scholars agree with Serapion. They date the text to a generation after Peter's death during the rise of Docetism. While the Gospel of Peter remained popular among some Christians for centuries, it was never widely accepted as authoritative. Around the same time, another curious story unfolded in North Africa involving the Acts of Paul. This text included wild tales such as the Apostle Paul baptizing a lion. Sure, the story is entertaining, but the origins of the text raised serious doubts. Tertullian of Carthage investigated this, and eventually he discovered that the author was not an apostle or anyone connected to Paul. Instead, it was written by a well-meaning elder who admitted to fabricating the stories out of admiration for Paul. This confession led to the elder's dismissal from the church, and the Acts of Paul was rejected as an authoritative text. What do you think about Docetism, the belief that Jesus only looked human but his physical body was really more of an illusion? Let me know in the comments down below. And now for a quick break. But first, I wanted to give a shout out and big thank you to Jennifer Joey and Dorothy Breen for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. Mary's holy birth and childhood. How much do you know about the Virgin Mary's childhood? You know, the mother of Jesus? You'd think her story would be included in the Bible, and some of it is, but there's nothing to be found about her early years. You don't get the full picture of Mary's life until you read the Proto-Evangelium of James, otherwise known as the Infancy Gospel of James. While this text isn't part of the Bible, it became wildly popular in early Christian communities and shaped many enduring traditions. But what exactly does it say? The tale begins with Mary's parents, who for the first time are named Joachim and Anne. They're described as righteous but heartbroken because they couldn't have children. Their childlessness was seen as a sign of God's disfavor, and Joachim was even turned away from offering his gifts at the temple. Feeling rejected, he fled to the desert to pray and fast, while Anne stayed home, pouring out her sorrow to God. Now, this might sound familiar. It mirrors the Old Testament story of Hannah, who prayed for the prophet Samuel. And just like in that story, an angel appeared to both Joachim and Anne, promising them a miraculous child who would be spoken of around the world. When Mary was born, Anne dedicated her to God, vowing that her child would live a holy life. According to the Proto-Evangelium, this was no ordinary birth. It was celebrated in heaven itself. Angels rejoiced as they recognized Mary's future as the one chosen to bring Jesus into the world. Anne went all out to make sure her daughter's life reflected this divine calling. She even created a special sanctuary in her home where Mary would stay, shielded from anything unclean. One of the more whimsical moments in the story comes when 6-month-old Mary is set down to see if she can stand. When she takes 7 steps and declares that Mary won't walk on earthly ground again until she is taken to the temple. And true to her word, when Mary turned 3, her parents brought her to the temple in a grand ceremony. Young girls carrying lamps accompanied her, and the priests welcomed her with blessings. Mary grew up in the temple, surrounded by an atmosphere of holiness. According to the text, she was even fed by angels. But when she turned 12, the priests decided it was time for her to marry. They gathered widowers from the line of David and gave each a rod to see who would be chosen. And in a dramatic moment, a dove flew out of Joseph's rod, marking him as Mary's future husband. Joseph was much older and initially hesitant, but eventually he accepted the role as her protector, respecting her vow of virginity. The story also includes the famous Annunciation. While Mary was working on the temple veil, the angel Gabriel appeared to her, announcing that she would be the mother of Jesus. This divine encounter echoed the extraordinary nature of her life as portrayed in the Proto-Evangelium. So why isn't this story in the Bible? For one, the church didn't consider it historically reliable or divinely inspired. Some parts, like Mary being fed by angels, seem more like folklore than fact. It was even listed as a text to avoid by Pope St. Gelasius I in the 5th century, but that didn't stop its influence. The Proto-Evangelium gave names to Mary's parents, inspired traditions like her dedication at the temple, and emphasized her lifelong purity and holiness. So, is this story history or mere legend? Tell me what you believe in the comments below. Wizard battles and a talking dog. The Acts of Peter is one wild ride filled with talking dogs, wizard battles, and flying stunts gone wrong. It's one of those ancient texts that will make you ask yourself, what in the world did I just read? So let's get into it. The tale begins with Peter squaring off against Simon Magus, a magician from Samaria. In the canonical Acts of the Apostles, Simon Magus isn't described as a bad guy, he's just misguided. He tries to buy the power of the Holy Spirit from Peter and gets a stern scolding. But in the Acts of Peter, Simon is cranked up to full-blown villain mode. In this text, he's in Rome, claiming to have divine powers and leading people astray. And naturally, Peter can't let this slide. So, how does Peter deal with this magical troublemaker? With a talking dog, of course. You heard me. Peter teaches a dog to talk and sends it to Simon's house to deliver a message. The pooch essentially tells Simon that he's a garbage person and doesn't hold back. The dog roasts Simon so hard that the magician's host, Marcellus, repents on the spot. Once the dog finishes its rant, it lies down and dies. However, Simon is not one to give up easily. He challenges Peter to a showdown in the Roman Forum. The stakes? Prove who's got the real divine power. The first test involves a young man who Simon kills with just a whisper. Peter takes his time reviving him, much to the annoyance of the crowd, but ultimately he brings the man back to life. Then another woman begs Peter to resurrect her dead son. Simon steps up, pretending to raise the body, but Peter exposes his trickery. He shows the crowd that the man is still dead, and that Simon was basically moving the corpse around like a puppet. This earns Peter a standing ovation. But even after being humiliated, Simon doesn't quit. To prove he's a god, he announces to the crowd that he will fly. You just know this can't end well. With the audience watching, Simon takes off, soaring above the forum. For a moment it seems like he might win, but Peter prays to God, asking him to cut off Simon's demonic power. Not to kill him, just humble him a little. And oh boy, does Simon get humbled. He crashes to the ground, shattering his legs. Things then go from bad to worse when quack doctors botch his treatment, and Simon dies. Peter's adventures, however, don't end there. After upsetting some Roman officials by preaching chastity to their girlfriends, he tries to flee the city. But Jesus' ghost appears, guilt-tripping him into staying. Peter then returns and willingly accepts his fate: death. He requests to be crucified upside down because he doesn't feel worthy of dying like Jesus. And that's how his story ends. Upside down, but victorious in faith. So, according to the Acts of Peter, demons can give people superpowers and apostles can teach dogs to talk. No wonder this text isn't included in the Bible. Secrets from the Questions of Mary. You'll have to forgive me for what's next. According to a text known as the Questions of Mary, Jesus had the power to magically create a woman from his own body. And what would he do with this woman? Well, let's just say it wasn't exactly PG. The Questions of Mary is an ancient and bizarre text that was never included in the Bible. It's only known because of a 4th century bishop named Epiphanius. He mentioned it while criticizing heretical works that were popular at the time. So what's the story in this crazy written work? Well, it starts with Jesus taking Mary Magdalene to a mountainside. Things escalate from there. After arriving, Jesus magically produces a woman from his side, kind of like how Eve was made from Adam. And here comes the really shocking part. Jesus then does the deed with this woman right in front of Mary. And that's not all. Afterward, Jesus eats the byproduct of what just happened. That's as specific as I'll get. Mary's so horrified by this that she dies, but Jesus brings her back to life. And instead of being sympathetic, he blames her for not having enough faith. Now, why is this so strange? Jesus explains that when he talked about ascending to where he had been before in the Bible, he was talking about going to heaven. He was referring to eating his own, well, you know. And when he told his disciples to drink his blood and eat his flesh, it wasn't about communion like most people think. Nope, he's actually talking about consuming his poop. Yes, you read that right. If this text is to be believed, Jesus was kind of a perv. Luckily though, this whole story was so extreme and gross that it was largely erased, and for good reason. Epiphanius made sure to warn people about it, highlighting how far off the questions of Mary was from the true teachings of the Church. The Gospel of Bartholomew. Did you know that Jesus once journeyed to the underworld to rescue Adam and Eve from Satan? And that Mary Magdalene almost burned the entire world to ashes by revealing a divine secret? Buckle up, folks, because the Gospel of Bartholomew is nuts. This forbidden text is filled to the brim with shocking revelations and jaw-dropping encounters. Written as a dialogue, it dives into the aftermath of Jesus' resurrection and is packed with dramatic, sometimes humorous, and downright strange stories. It all starts with Bartholomew asking Jesus to explain the mysteries of heaven. Bartholomew mentions that during the crucifixion he witnessed angels descending to worship Jesus, only for Jesus to vanish from the cross. Then a mysterious voice boomed from the depths of the earth. Bartholomew asks where Jesus had gone, and Jesus casually explains that he had been to hell, or more specifically, Hades. Why? To rescue Adam, Eve, and others who were trapped there. Jesus then recounts an epic moment when he demanded entry to Hades. Once inside, he chained up Satan, referred to here as Belial, and freed the righteous souls. Bartholomew claims to have seen a giant figure being carried to heaven by angels and asks Jesus who it was. Jesus identifies the man as Adam and claims that he told him, "I was hanged on the cross because of you and your children." Harsh. Now, Bartholomew's curiosity doesn't stop there. He asks how many souls leave the world each day, to which Jesus replies 30,000. He also asks how many of those souls make it to paradise, only 3, and how many righteous souls are among the departed, 53. Jesus explains that the rest go to a place of resurrection. The apostles are stunned by these answers, but Jesus also reassures them that he can be everywhere at once, teaching them while also tending to matters in heaven and beyond. The second section of the Gospel of Bartholomew shifts focus to Mary and how she conceived Jesus. Bartholomew and the other apostles nervously debate who should ask her this very personal question. But after some back and forth, Bartholomew takes the plunge. Mary warns them that revealing the mystery could literally set the world on fire, but after some persistence, she agrees to tell them. Mary describes a miraculous encounter with an angel in the temple. The angel brought her bread and wine in an event that clearly prefigures the Eucharist, telling her that she would conceive a son who would save all of creation. And as Mary speaks, fire begins to pour from her mouth, threatening to engulf the entire world. Luckily, Jesus shows up just in time to stop her, warning that revealing such mysteries could end everything. The apostles are understandably left speechless and probably a little scared. One of the most shocking moments in the Gospel comes when Bartholomew confronts Satan himself. Jesus allows Satan to be summoned and questioned about his deeds on earth. When asked about his greatest act of deceit, Satan chillingly admits to poisoning the water in the Garden of Eden with his own chest and armpit sweat. Yuck! He reveals that he had planted sickness and death into the very rivers and springs humanity relies on. This act of corruption caused untold suffering and made him the ultimate villain. It's a moment that shows just how sinister and calculating Satan is in this story. What do you think Satan's sweat tastes like? And can this sweat still be found in water supplies today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Bartholomew also asks Satan why he continues to torment humanity, to which Satan replies that he thrives on making people stumble. His purpose, he claims, is to bring humans down with him into eternal darkness. Later in the text, Jesus takes the apostles to a mountain and reveals that he will ascend to his Father in 7 days. But before he goes, the disciples request a glimpse of the abyss, a bold and, as it turns out, terrifying request. Jesus reluctantly agrees, calls upon angels, and the world rolls up like a scroll, revealing the abyss below. The apostles immediately fall on their faces in fear, and Jesus, who's likely shaking his head, tells them, "I told you this wasn't a good idea." He then has the angels cover the abyss again, leaving the disciples thoroughly shaken. The story ends with discussions of what lies in heaven and more questions about humanity's fate. What do you think this abyss looks like? Is it something like outer space? Deep, dark, and empty? Or is it more like what hell is described as? A bottomless pit filled with eternal fire and suffering? Bizarre stories from the book of Enoch, star prisons, glowing babies, and super angels. Have you ever wondered what happened to Enoch, Noah's great-grandfather? The book of Enoch reveals a surprising truth. He became an angel with 36 pairs of wings and the power to cause earthquakes. Prepare to be amazed by this lost chapter of biblical history. This apocryphal text is mysterious, controversial, and contains some truly bizarre stories. So what makes this book so special, and why is it not included in the Bible? Let's take a look at 4 of the strangest tales from the book of Enoch. First up is the story of the Nephilim. If you're a fan of the channel, you've heard Katrina and I mention these beings before. They're briefly mentioned in the Bible as giants, the offspring of fallen angels and humans. But in the book of Enoch, these Nephilim are much worse than what you might expect. According to Enoch, these giants were monstrous creatures growing to be over 2 miles tall. They weren't just huge, they were also terribly destructive. They ate all of humanity's food, and when that ran out, they started devouring people and animals. It was so bad that the screams of the victims were heard in heaven, prompting God to flood the earth to get rid of these terrifying beings. Next, the book of Enoch offers a fascinating look at the solar system. During one of Enoch's heavenly tours, he's shown a flat disk of the sun and even suggests that the earth has an edge. This description has caught the attention of some modern-day flat earthers who use this part of the text to support their theories. But that's not all. Enoch also sees a prison for stars, a place where stars that didn't show up on time or were late for duty were punished. They were bound in this fiery abyss for thousands of years. It's a strange, alternate version of creation and the universe that didn't make it into the Bible. Then there's the story of Noah's birth, which is pretty wild. According to the book of Enoch, when Noah was born, his eyes emitted beams of light so bright they lit up the entire house. He even spoke to God as soon as he was born. His father Lamech was freaked out and thought Noah might be the son of an angel. But Enoch reassured him, saying that Noah would eventually be the one to save humanity. This vision of Noah shows him as someone special from the very beginning, with almost supernatural abilities. And finally, there's the strange tale of Metatron, a powerful being mentioned briefly in the Talmud. In the book of Enoch, Metatron is revealed to be none other than Enoch himself. After Enoch's earthly life, God turns him into a super angel, granting him unimaginable powers. Metatron has 36 pairs of wings, each large enough to cover the entire world, and his body is made of fire, with flames in his hair and lightning flashing from his eyelids. He's so powerful that storms and earthquakes follow him wherever he goes. These stories paint a picture of a much stranger and more complex world than the one we're used to from the Bible. The book of Enoch's tales of giants, star prisons, glowing babies, and super angels are just a few of the many stories that didn't make it into the Bible. So why were they left out? Maybe it's because they challenge the more familiar ideas of God, creation, and the universe. But what do you think? Could there be another reason? A metaphor for salvation, sex and salvation. Was there something going on between Jesus and Mary Magdalene? According to the Gospel of Philip, there definitely was. However, it might not be what you're expecting. This text was discovered near Nag Hammadi in 1945, and it offers an unusual take on Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and salvation itself. It's less about scandalous love affairs and more about deep metaphors, although that hasn't stopped it from being linked to wild theories, including those featured in the Da Vinci Code. So does the Gospel of Philip claim that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were lovers? Well, not exactly. The text does mention Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion and describes Jesus kissing her, which made the other disciples jealous. But before you start picturing a steamy soap opera, scholars explain that the kisses were likely spiritual in nature, not romantic. Early Christians often greeted each other with a holy kiss, and in this case, it symbolized the sharing of divine knowledge. But if it's not about romance, why is sex such a big theme in the Gospel of Philip? Well, that's because the text uses sexual union as a metaphor for salvation. If you're confused, you're not alone. Think of it this way. Humanity's current state is seen as separated, much like Adam and Eve before their fall. The Gospel explains that when Eve was inside Adam, they were whole and death didn't exist. But when they were split apart, death entered the world. Salvation then is described as bringing the male and female back together, a spiritual reunion that reverses the separation and conquers death. So how does this spiritual reunion happen if it doesn't involve hanky-panky? Through a mysterious ritual called the bridal chamber. I know what you're thinking, but this wasn't about physical intimacy. It was more about a symbolic process where believers enacted the union of their spiritual self, described as male, with its angelic counterpart, described as female. This metaphorical marriage symbolized reconnecting with the divine and escaping the flawed material world. So were these early Christians celibate or all about marriage? That's where things get tricky. Some scholars believe that the Gospel of Philip reflects a positive view of marriage and sexual union, seeing it as a way to mirror the divine union. But others argue that the text promotes a more non-indulgent lifestyle, shunning all physical desires, including sex, even within marriage. It's a scholarly debate that's still ongoing. The Gospel of Philip is deeply tied to Gnostic beliefs, which often viewed the material world as flawed or corrupt, created by a lesser God. For these believers, Christ's role wasn't about dying on the cross, but about bringing knowledge that helped spiritual souls reconnect with the perfect divine realm. If you have read the Gospel of Philip yourself, be sure to let me know what you think it's all about in the comments down below. Were Jesus and Mary Magdalene doing the horizontal tango behind closed doors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.